Hello, American literature friends. We are back for another session. Today we are going to cover Art Spiegelman and his book Mouse, as well as the graphic novel term in the course terminology. So we will start there with the graphic novel. Mouse is perhaps the most famous graphic novel in all of American literature. You see it right here. The graphic novel is a narrative in which the story is conveyed via sequential art. That's an important concept in understanding graphic novel, is that sequential art. And as you look on the pages, you will see, like on the first page on 1051, there are 8 sequential pictures. There's 8 little frames, and they tell the story in the sequence of those frames. Some of the rest of them have more frames, have fewer frames. For example, on 1053, instead of 8 frames, you get 8 instead, but there's 3 stacked at the bottom right. Some of them have more frames than that. For example, on 1055, you have these 6 small frames at the top and then 5 more at the bottom. Some of them have fewer frames. For example, on 1057, you have 1 long frame right there in the middle. Generally, these kinds of artistic graphic depictions in the United States, and especially in literature, are read back to the early 20th century and even the 1890s. Into this comic strip called The Yellow Kid is often read as the beginning of like graphic art, graphic design in this country. The Yellow Kid was always one single panel, one single frame, like this one right here, that had one little joke that was told in this one little frame. And then as you get into things like comic books in the 40s and 50s and 1960s, they're not as big as novels. They don't have chapters, not as long as novels, but the art gets told in these sequential frames. And in between those, you get things like comic strips, which are often 1 to 6 little sequential frames of art that tell a little story. And then finally, in the 1970s and 1980s, you get the graphic novel, where you basically have a very long comic strip or comic book. A novel-length story is told in all this sequential art. As you see right here, they're generally longer and bound more durably than traditional comic books. Graphic novels gained widespread recognition in the late 1970s, so they haven't been around that long. We're talking 40, 50 years tops. In the early 1980s, and became mainstream by the late 1980s and early 90s. And that time period is really important to understand, because it was Mouse and a couple of other books like Mouse that moved graphic novels from this silly sort of comic book perspective, the general perspective that comic books are for kids, that they're these sort of silly little fantasy stories. They shifted into being taken seriously as literary art. And it's really Mouse that is the first graphic novel that moves into literature. And what that does is help us jump into Art Spiegelman's career as an artist and as a writer. He was born in 1948, shortly after the end of World War II. And you see on page 1049 where they tell you about his particular career. Art Spiegelman was born in New York City, but he moved, let's see if we can find this timeline, he moved to San Francisco in the mid-1960s, and he worked for the Topps company. If you don't know Topps, Topps mainly made its money from making baseball cards, but Art Spiegelman worked for part of their company that made Garbage Pail Kids, which were, if you don't know Garbage Pail Kids, they're these sort of satirical pictures, these little joke stickers and pictures. You see an example of one right there. Let's see if we can pull a few more up here. You can see, if you just Google them, there's Garbage Pail Kids have existed for a long, long time, since the late 70s, early 80s. But you can see there are these sort of silly, gross pictures of different people, of different little kids with this sort of gross, vulgar humor. Spiegelman got his start working for Garbage Pail Kids, but then, as they tell you on page 1049, he returned to New York. I don't see here it is. When in 1970, Spiegelman moved from New York to San Francisco. So that's when he moved to San Francisco. He returned to New York a few years later in the late 1970s, after a few years living in San Francisco. And it is really those two experiences put together that caused him to write Mouse. He had already had some success as a graphic artist, working for Topps magazine, making Garbage Pail Kids, writing some other comic strips and comic books. But then when he moved back to New York City, he began to interview his father, who was an immigrant who had immigrated from Europe after World War II. His father was a Holocaust survivor he and his mother, both Art Spiegelman's father and mother, both survived the Auschwitz concentration camp, which was the largest Nazi concentration camp. Over 1 million people were killed in Auschwitz. But Art Spiegelman's father and mother both survived it. And by the time that he began to interview his father about this in the late 1970s, his mother had already passed away. And so he depended completely on his father to tell him the story of how he met his mother, how they fell in love and got married, and then how they hid from the Nazis for a good long while before they were finally captured. And then his father survived their experience in the concentration camp because he made and repaired shoes and became this important person who made and repaired the Nazi soldiers' boots during the war, which is the main reason that he survived his experience in Auschwitz. After World War II, his parents moved to the United States. His father lived outside of New York City. And you get that in the chapter that's in the book, you get that, and this is a really common device in this book. Every chapter starts with this big frame. You can see this chapter is called Mousetrap. And then often what will happen, and you get this on page 1051 and 1052 in the book, is the stories will begin in the present day with Art Spiegelman interviewing his father. His father has remarried to this other woman named Anja. And you see also that all of the characters are made to look like mice in this, except that's not all of the characters. The central device of Mouse is that different nationalities and different ethnicities get to be different animals. All of the Jewish people are mice. All of the Polish people are pigs. All of the French people are frogs. All of the Americans are dogs, and all of the Nazis are cats. And so he plays with this common stereotype of cats chasing mice, cats trying to kill mice. It becomes this central device in the book because it is his way to sort of to take this really heavy, really dark subject, in this case the Holocaust, and his parents' survival of it, and make it a little bit lighter. It makes it not so brutal, not so inhuman. And so you get all of the characters depicted as mice. You see his dad. See if we can get the first one of these pulled up. This is the second page. This would be page 1052 in the book. And this is where, on the second page, you see how one of the central devices in the book is that Art Spiegelman's dad, his experience surviving World War II has made him this very penny pinching. He's afraid to waste any money, it bothers him that his new wife is going to get her hair done, going to the hairdresser on page 1051. Anja, who also is his second wife, not Art's mom, her experience surviving the Holocaust has made her she's like, we survived this thing, now we should get out and enjoy life again. And she's wants to take care of herself and go to the hairdresser. And his father has this almost opposite reaction, which is this fear that something like this could happen again. And so again, they need to be pinching pennies and watching everything in case they need the money to take care of themselves again. You see this transition at the bottom of page 1052, and you can see by how he draws the picture here. I can't stay long. I need to know more about you and Anja. It's chilly. Take also here a blanket. No thanks. What happened in 1994 after you left Shrojula? And you see right here on the left and right, it's Art and his dad, whose name is Vladik, in the present day. But he begins to give you this flashback so that between them, you see them walking. We sneak towards Sosnowiec. And the panel in the middle between their present day is this jump back into the past. And then on the next page, the rest of the next pages are almost all flashbacks into the past, unless you get an interruption in the storytelling. The way that the panels are set up is designed. Let's see if we've got the next page here. Yes, here we go. Let's see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. What you get on the next page, and this is page 1053 in your book, one of the things that happens in this chapter is Vladek and his wife, Art's mom, go from just sort of get hustled from place to place, just in search of safety. They're trying to stay safe. The first place that they go to, and this is on 1053, the governess of their older child, Art Spiegelman's older brother, they go ask her for help. My God, it's the Spiegelmans. You'll bring trouble. Go away quickly. And so the first person that they go to ask for help, asks to hide them, slams the door in their face and is like, no, I'm afraid of the Nazis. Get away from here. They decide to go somewhere else. Maybe we should try my father's old house. The janitor has known our family for years. And this person lets them in and unlocks the gate and lets them in. Let's see what the next copy picture that we have here is. 92, 1593. Yeah, here we go. And this person hides them, takes them in. And this is that's on page 1054 in the book. That person hides them in a barn, essentially. But what happens on that next page, on 1055, if you've got your book, is for not the first time in the book and not the last time, Art's mom stays at home, and his dad, Vladek, the father, goes to look for help. And he's afraid he's being followed, but this person says, no, I'm Jewish like you, and offers to help him and tells him to go to this black market. And that's what you get on page 1056 right here. Vladek comes back home. Let's see if we can pull this out and make it a little bigger. Yeah, here we go. Vladek gets back home, and despite being terrified himself, he brings back food from the black market. I had to get breakfast, sausages, eggs, chocolate. It's a miracle. How did you manage it? The mom says. Once again, this sort of they're on the run and hiding, and he manages because he connects with the black market here to bring them food. And then you jump back to the present in this one little panel. I went back again to Dekurta, this street in the town where they live. There I could change jewelry for marks and marks for food or a place to stay. This time there were more people. There even I saw some Jewish boys I knew from before the war. And Vladek, Art's dad, we need a hiding place. How about Miss Kalka? She has a small farm on the outskirts of town. She might take you in if you can pay. Again, this comes back to this idea. This experience has changed Vladek, Art's dad, for the rest of his life, because he's always saving money, scrounging money in case he may need to be in some situation again. This becomes this place where they go back to twice in this chapter. This time and then one other time, they go to this farm on the outskirts of town, and this woman, in exchange for them paying her, says, all right, Mr. Spiegelman, you and your wife can stay in my barn. We'll come late tonight. But the woman says, remember, if you're found, I don't know you. You must say that the barn door is open and you sneaked in. And Vladek promises, don't worry, we won't betray you. Let's see if we've got what we've got next here. And then on page 1058, they encounter Mrs. Matanawa again, another person in the black market who offers to give them a fresh loaf of bread. And this is an important change for them because she offers to let them live in her house or live in her basement with them. And they come and she that night comes and gets Vladek and Anja from the barn and takes them back into town to her apartment. So that you get this image right here where Anja is playing, where Vladek is playing with the little boy. Vladek is sitting at the table. Anja's playing with the little boy. The little boy was very smart. He loved very much Anja. But again, you had to pay Mrs. Matanawa to keep you right. Of course I paid, and well I paid. What do you think? Someone will risk their life for nothing? and Anja tutors the little boy. He was very bad in German, so Anja tutored him. And soon he came out with very good grades. My teacher asked me how I improved so much, so I told them my mother was helping me. Again, they are living in this constant state of fear, constant state of being caught, and any little misstep, even this boy telling them how he got better at speaking German, could get them caught, could be dangerous for them. The next page is on page 1061 in your book there. You see on page 1060, Mrs. Monanawa, somebody comes and knocks on the door, and Vladek and Anja immediately have to go hide in the closet. And it's just this constant state of nervousness and anxiety. They're afraid that the Nazis are going to catch them at any moment. And finally, at the bottom of 1060 and top of 1061, right here, Mrs. Monanawa throws them out because she's afraid the Nazis are going to come find them. And this is the hardest, darkest night that they have in some sense, because they have to walk around outside exposed all night. Staying on the street all night is too dangerous. Maybe we can hide in this construction site. Here is a foundation made very deep in the ground, and you see Vladek and Anja right there. They jump into the foundation of this construction site, and they have to spend a night hiding down in there. And then the next morning they end up going back to Mrs. Monanawa's and hiding back in the barn there on page 1062. And so what you get in this chapter is this ongoing, they go there just rushed from one place to another, hiding in a barn, hiding on the street, hiding in this person's apartment. Sometimes things are better, sometimes things are worse, but it is this ongoing struggle to avoid being caught. To go back to the chapter title, to avoid being caught in the Nazi mousetrap. You see there at the top of 1063, you get this jump back to the present where Vladek explains the situation to Art and says he has to give him some historical context because Vladek and his wife are trying to get out of Poland and get to Hungary, and Art says, well, wasn't it bad in Hungary too? And his dad has to remind him, well, it eventually was, but at this point in time, it would have been much better for them to escape out of Poland and get to Hungary. Let's get the next image pulled up here, 1595. Here we go. The next one is the one that always stands out in my mind, and this is on page 1064. Finally, the next day on 1063, the next day Vladek goes back to Dekerta Street to try to buy more food in the black market. Mrs. Monanawa finds him again and says, look, the Gestapo, the Nazis ended up not searching our house. She invites them back to her house, but she says her husband, who is a German soldier, is going to be coming back, and so they are going to have to hide in the storage unit in the basement of the building for 10 days. And that is where you get this very sort of startling image where I set up a mattress, I'll come down whenever I can. In the day, we were afraid to breathe because people came down off into their lockers. And at night, we could move around a little, but it was something else down there. And you see, Anja says, there are rats down here. And Vladek tries to calm her down. He says, no big deal, it's just these little mice. But obviously, and this is one of the tricks, one of the greatnesses of the art in this. Right here on the left panel, you have the flashback to the 1940s, to them hiding. Then you have the barrel and the rat, one of the rats that was crawling over them. Of course, it was really rats, but I wanted Anja to feel more easy. And so right here in this panel, you get both the past, the subject that they're talking about, and the present. So you get the story being told in the present, and the thing that's being talked about, these rats that are crawling all over them while they're hiding. And of course, as you see on the next page, they were down there all night starving. On 1065. It's been 3 days since you brought any food. Here, have another candy. I had candies I had organized on Dekerta. Only this we had to eat. So they basically lived on just little pieces of candy for 3 days. Finally, Mrs. Monanawa brings them some food. And then finally, after 10 days, her husband, who is in the military, goes back. He's off of his 10-day leave and goes back in the military. And they get to come back upstairs. You see at the bottom of 1065, Anja taking a bath while Vladek talks to her. And then on 1066, the last page of this chapter that's in our book, Vladek has this episode where he's out walking on the street. So when it came Thursday, I went in the direction to take a streetcar to see Kauka and Sosnowicz. He's going to go back, talk to this woman who had kept them in their barn. And some of the kids scream, a Jew, help mommy, a Jew. The mothers always said, be careful, a Jew will catch you and eat you, and catch you to a bag and eat you. I approached over to them, and you see Vladek right there say, Heil Hitler. Again, another stressful moment where he has to pretend to be like a loyal Nazi in Poland so that he's not caught. And what you get, the purpose, the reason that they put this chapter in the book, because it is not the most intense chapter, and a lot of Maus is about Vladek surviving in Auschwitz concentration camp. This chapter is very much before that and about him and Anja, Vladek's parents, trying not to get caught. The reason that they put this chapter in the book, I suggest, is because it shows the stresses that they went through, this sort of running from place to place and trying to stay hidden and trying to not get caught by the Nazis during the Holocaust. That is why you get that. The title of the chapter is Mousetrap, them trying not to get trapped, trying not to get caught. That is the reason that Maus, and let's go back to Maus. Maus was published in two parts. There's a part 1 and a part 2. They're both graphic novels. In the second part, Art's dad, Vladek, passes away in real life. He's an elderly man, of course, by the time he's telling Art about this story. But what this book does is tell the story of Art sort of discovering where he came from and what his parents went through before they got to this country and had him as a child. He was born in 1948, just 3 years after his parents had survived this experience and escaped to the United States. And so what it becomes is this sort of family history about the things his family went through. He had an older brother who his parents sent away to try to help protect him, a brother named Richu, and Richu was killed in the Holocaust. He didn't survive like his parents did. And what you see right here is the cover of part 1, My Father Bleeds History. And there's a picture of Vladek and Anja. And so what this becomes is this story both of Art Spiegelman figuring out what his parents went through, but it is also very clearly the story of how his parents hid in all these different ways for as long as they could, and then had to fight to survive this Nazi concentration camp, Auschwitz. And he uses this device of the graphic novel and of making the Jewish people mice and the Nazis cats and the French people frogs. He sort of plays with these stereotypes. The Nazis, one of the common pieces of Nazi propaganda presented Jewish people as rodents, as rats or mice, not rice. Rats or mice. And so what Art Spiegelman does is take that and sort of use it and play with it in this graphic novel. There are many other graphic novels. There is a graphic novel called A Conversation with God, which is generally considered the first graphic novel from the 1970s. A Contract with God. You see it right here on this page. Will Eisner's A Contract with God from 1978. Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns is one of the most famous ones. Watchmen, if any of you know that book or that series from HBO, is another famous one from the 1980s. The Walking Dead is maybe now our most famous graphic novel. But Maus parts 1 and 2 are still widely regarded as the greatest graphic novels. They won the Pulitzer Prize. They're the sort of landmark graphic novel. You see it even mentioned right here. Became familiar to the public in the late 1980s after the commercial successes of the first volume of Art Spiegelman's Maus in 1986. The second volume about his father dying, as well as his father's escape, surviving Auschwitz and finally getting out, was published in 1991. If you have questions about Art Spiegelman, about Maus, about graphic novels, any of that stuff, be in touch with me. The chapter that's in the book is short and it doesn't give you a lot of context for the much larger story that gets told if you read Mouse Part 1 and Mouse Part 2 together. It's definitely worth finding and reading if you're interested in the Holocaust or in graphic novels, honestly. If you have questions about any of that, be in touch with me, email, whatever is easiest for you to get in touch with me. Otherwise, I will see you next time for our next session of American Literature Part 2. Thank y'all for your time, and I'll see you again soon.